The sun hadn't yet broken over the Medicine Bow Range when Mara Brennan's hands started shaking. Not from the cold, though February in Wyoming had a way of crawling under your skin and settling in your bones, but from the careful arithmetic of survival she performed every morning before anyone else woke. 2 cups of coffee, black. Strong enough to strip paint. Jack liked it that way, said anything less was water pretending to be useful. Eggs fried hard, yolks broken, and cooked through because runny made him gag, and she'd learned that lesson 3 years ago, with a plate smashed against the kitchen wall and yolk dripping down her hair. Bacon crisp. Toast golden. Everything exactly as he expected, or the day would start wrong, and once the day started wrong with Jack Brennan, it never found its way back to right. Her reflection caught in the window above the sink, a woman who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. She'd been pretty once, or so her mother used to say. Soft features, kind eyes, the kind of curves that should have made her feel womanly, but instead just made her feel visible in all the wrong ways. Jack had liked those curves when they'd met. Now they were just another thing he owned and resented in equal measure. The bruise on her left ribs was 3 days old, fading from purple to that sickly yellow-green that meant it was healing. She'd gotten good at cataloging them. The one on her upper arm, from when he'd grabbed her too hard after she'd forgotten to pick up his tobacco in town, was newer, still tender. She'd covered it with a long-sleeved blouse buttoned to the wrists despite the indoor heat from the wood stove. This was the Broken Creek Ranch, though everyone just called it the Granger place, after the family who'd owned it for 3 generations. Mara and Jack lived in the small house at the south edge of the property, the one reserved for ranch hands and their families. Jack worked the cattle, fixed fences, did whatever Cole Granger needed doing. Mara cooked for the ranch hands during busy seasons, roundup, branding, calving. It gave her something to do, somewhere to be that wasn't trapped in this house, with its thin walls and memories that stuck to everything like smoke. The coffee pot gurgled its final breath. She poured carefully, her hand steadier now that she'd fallen into the rhythm of the routine. Routine was safe. Routine was predictable. Routine meant you knew what was coming and could brace for it. That ready? She didn't jump. She'd trained that reflex out of herself. Yes, just plating it now. Jack shuffled into the kitchen, still in his undershirt and work pants, suspenders hanging at his sides. He wasn't a large man, maybe 5'10", wiry in the way men got when they worked hard and drank harder. His face had been handsome once, too, strong jaw and clear eyes. Now those eyes were perpetually bloodshot, and his jaw was more often clenched than not. He sat without a word. She placed the plate in front of him, the coffee beside it. He took a bite of eggs, chewed, swallowed. She waited. Bacon's burnt. It wasn't. She'd checked. But she said, "I'm sorry. I'll do better tomorrow." "See that you do." He shoveled food into his mouth like he was fueling up machinery. "Granger needs the feed shed cleaned out today. I'll be late." "All right." "There's a social at the church this weekend. That Henderson woman was asking if you'd help with the food." Mara's stomach clenched. Mrs. Henderson asked every month. Every month Mara said no, and every month Mrs. Henderson's eyes would linger on whatever bruise was visible that week, her mouth tightening in that way that meant she'd seen and chosen to say nothing. "I have a lot to do here. I didn't ask if you wanted to go. I said you're helping." Jack's fork scraped against the plate. "People are starting to talk about how you never show your face. Makes me look bad. Makes him look bad." As if she were a reflection that wasn't polishing up nicely enough. "I'll help," he grunted, which was as close to satisfaction as he got. 15 minutes later, he was gone, the door slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cupboard. Mara stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the silence he left behind. Then she cleaned the dishes, swept the floor, and changed into her work clothes. Today she was cooking for the main house. Cole Granger was expecting 12 hands for lunch during the fence repair on the north pasture. The walk to the main house took 10 minutes across frozen ground that crunched under her boots. The Granger house was a sprawling ranch-style structure with a wide porch and windows that actually let in light. Cole's wife had died 4 years back, cancer, quick and brutal, and he'd never remarried. He lived there alone except for the housekeeper who came twice a week and couldn't cook worth a damn, which is why Mara had started helping out. She let herself in through the kitchen door. Cole had already left for the pasture, but he'd left a note on the counter in his angular handwriting, 12 for lunch. Stew would be good. Take whatever you need. See. She appreciated his notes. They were simple, direct, never demanding, just information. She could work with information. The kitchen was well stocked and organized in a way that suggested Cole actually used it, unlike Jack, who treated their kitchen like a restaurant where the service was always too slow. She pulled out the ingredients she'd need: beef from the cold storage, potatoes, carrots, onions. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, chopping and browning and building flavors the way her grandmother had taught her before the world had gotten complicated. Cooking was the one thing that was still hers. Jack couldn't ruin it because he needed her to do it, and she was good at it, really good. It was the only compliment she ever got that felt real. When the ranch hands would finish their plates and ask for seconds, when Cole would nod his approval, when she could taste something she'd made and know it was exactly right. She was stirring the pot when she heard boots on the porch. Too early for lunch. She glanced at the clock. Only 10:30. Cole Granger pushed through the door, and she immediately noticed the tension in his shoulders. He was a tall man, lean and weathered in the way ranchers got, somewhere in his early 40s with gray threading through dark hair. His face was all hard planes and sharp angles, the kind that looked severe until he smiled, which wasn't often but was genuine when it happened. "Smells good already." He hung his hat on the peg by the door. "Should be ready by noon." She kept stirring, eyes on the pot. "Actually, I need to talk to you." Something in his tone made her stomach drop. She set down the spoon carefully. "Did I do something wrong?" "What? No." He frowned, and she realized her question had surprised him. "No, Mara, you do good work. This is about something else." She waited, hands clasped in front of her. Cole seemed to struggle with how to start. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, gestured for her to sit. She did, perched on the edge like she might need to run. Old habits. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it." He sat across from her, forearms on the table. "Jack's been causing problems." "I'll talk to him. Let me finish." Not unkind, but firm. "Yesterday he got into it with Ben Morris over in the South pasture. Started accusing him of stealing tools, got physical. Ben's got a black eye and a split lip." Mara's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm sorry, And 2 weeks ago he started a fight in town at McCreary's bar. Sheriff had to break it up." Cole's eyes, a sharp blue-gray, stayed steady on her face. "This is a pattern, Mara. And I've let it go because Jack works hard when he's sober. And because—" He paused. "Because I figured what happened in your home was your business." The air in the kitchen felt too thin. She couldn't get a full breath. "But I'm done figuring that way." Cole leaned back slightly, and his voice dropped. "I've seen the bruises. Ice water down her spine. I'm clumsy. Don't." Just one word, quiet but absolute. "Don't insult both of us with that lie." Mara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of this man who'd always been decent to her, who was now sitting there seeing her in a way she'd spent years making sure no one did. "What happens between me and Jack is my business when it affects my ranch and my crew, and when a woman I employ shows up with fingerprints on her arms that match her husband's hands." Cole's jaw tightened. "I should have said something sooner. I knew and I didn't say anything, and that makes me complicit." "You're not—" Her voice cracked. "You can't fix this." "Maybe not, but I can stop ignoring it." He stood, paced to the window, looked out at the winter bare landscape. "Jack's on thin ice here. One more incident and he's done. I'll fire him and you'll both have to leave the property." Terror, sharp and immediate. Where would they go? What would Jack do if he lost this job because of her? "Please don't—" Or, Cole turned back to her. "You can stay. Just you. There's a room above the barn that's heated and private. You can keep cooking, keep working. You'd have a place that's yours." The world tilted. "I can't leave my husband." "Why not?" "Because women didn't do that. Because the church said marriage was forever. Because she had nowhere else to go and no money of her own. And because Jack would find her and it would be so much worse. Because she'd made vows and breaking them would make her the villain in this story instead of him." She said none of that. Just shook her head. Cole studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, but had hoped for something different. "All right, but the offer stands. And Mara?" He waited until she met his eyes. "You don't owe him your suffering. You don't owe anyone that. He left her sitting there with those words ringing in her ears and stew that needed stirring and a life that felt like a trap closing tighter with every breath. The social at the church was exactly as miserable as Mara had expected. She'd spent Saturday afternoon making pies, apple, cherry, and a chocolate cream that was her specialty. Mrs. Henderson had been delighted when Mara showed up with them, all smiles and fluttering gratitude that felt like pity wearing a nicer dress. "Oh, Mara, these look wonderful. You're so talented in the kitchen. Isn't she talented, Margaret?" Margaret Dawson, wife of the mayor, gave Mara a once-over that missed nothing and approved of less. Very domestic. It wasn't a compliment. Mara arranged the pies on the dessert table and tried to disappear into the background, which was difficult when Mrs. Henderson kept pulling her into conversations with women who smiled with their mouths and judged with their eyes. "How's Jack doing? We haven't seen him at services lately." "He's been busy with the ranch." Of course. Hard work. Ranching. You're lucky to have such a devoted husband." "Lucky." She swallowed the laugh that wanted to escape and would have sounded too much like a scream. Jack was across the room with the other men, loud and jovial in the way he got when he was performing for an audience. He'd had 3 beers before they'd left the house, enough to smooth his edges, but not enough to make him sloppy. Yet, the night was young. "Mara," Jack's voice cut through the chatter. "Come here." She excused herself from Mrs. Henderson's clutches and crossed to where Jack stood with Thomas Brennan, his brother, older by 2 years and meaner by twice that, and Cole Granger. Jack's arm came around her waist, hand settling possessively on her hip. She forced herself not to stiffen. "Tell them about that roast you made last week, the one with the herb crust." She described the recipe, keeping her voice light and pleasant, while Thomas made appreciative noises and Cole watched with an expression she couldn't read. Jack's fingers dug into her hip just slightly, a reminder that she was performing well and should continue. "You're a lucky man, Jack," Thomas said, grinning. "Woman who cooks like that and looks like that? You hit the jackpot. Don't I know it?" Jack's hand squeezed harder, though she could stand to watch her figure a bit, getting a little soft around the middle. The words landed like punches. She felt her face burn, felt every pound she carried like shame instead of simply body. Thomas laughed. Cole didn't. "I think your wife looks just fine, Jack." Cole's voice was level, but something sharp lived underneath it. "And I think she's probably got better things to do than stand here while you criticize her." The air went tight. Jack's hand dropped from her waist. "Just joking around, Granger. Mara knows I'm kidding. Don't you, honey?" She nodded because what else could she do? "Sure." Cole's eyes held hers for just a second. "If you'll excuse me." He walked away, and Jack's expression went dark. "Uppity bastard. Who does he think he is?" "Your boss," Thomas said mildly. "Maybe don't poke that bear." "I wasn't poking anything. I was talking about my own wife." Jack grabbed another beer from a nearby cooler. "Come on." He steered her toward the door, away from the light and warmth and witnesses. They ended up outside in the cold where the church parking lot was lit by a single flickering street lamp. "What the hell was that?" Jack's voice was low, dangerous. "I didn't say anything." "You made me look like a fool in front of Granger, standing there all quiet and pathetic like I abuse you or something." "I didn't. You think I don't know what people say? That I'm too hard on you? That I should treat you like some kind of princess?" He stepped closer, beer on his breath, anger in his eyes. "I work myself to the bone to keep a roof over your head and food on the table. The least you could do is back me up when I'm having a conversation." "I'm sorry." The words came automatically, a reflex honed by repetition. "You're always sorry." He grabbed her arm, the same one that still had the fading bruise. His thumb pressed directly into it, and she gasped. "But you keep doing things that make me look bad. Jack, you're hurting me. I'm barely touching you. This is what hurting looks like. Is there a problem here?" Both of them turned. Cole stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, expression carefully neutral. Jack dropped her arm immediately. "Just having a private conversation with my wife, Granger." "Didn't look very private from where I was standing." Cole's eyes flicked to Mara. "You all right, ma'am?" The question hung in the cold air. She could say yes, should say yes. That's what you did. You smoothed things over, made it okay, protected the fragile dignity of the man who'd just had his fingers wrapped around your arm, hard enough to leave new bruises on top of old ones. I'm fine, she heard herself say. Cole didn't look convinced. Jack, maybe you should head home. Cool off. Don't tell me what to do with my own wife. I'm telling you what to do on property adjacent to mine where people I care about can see you. Cole's voice hardened. And what they're seeing doesn't look good. So you can leave now voluntarily, or I can make it a problem. Your choice. For a moment, Mara thought Jack might swing at him. She saw it in the way his shoulders bunched, the way his hands curled into fists. But Jack was a bully, not a fighter, and Cole Granger was both taller and harder and completely unafraid. This is bullshit, Jack spat, but he was already backing toward their truck. Mara, let's go. She started to follow, but Cole's voice stopped her. Mrs. Brennan, you don't have to leave if you don't want to. I can give you a ride home later. It was the kindest trap she'd ever been offered. Stay here with witnesses and light, or get in that truck with Jack and whatever he'd stewed into by the time they reached home. She chose the trap she knew. Thank you, Mr. Granger, but I should go. Something that might have been disappointment crossed his face. All right, but my offer from before still stands. Any time. She got in the truck. Jack peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spitting from the tires. They drove in silence for 3 miles before he spoke. You made me look weak tonight. I didn't mean to. Granger's stepping in like he's your protector, like I can't handle my own wife. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? I'm sorry. Everyone thinking I'm some kind of wife-beater when all I do is try to make you better. Try to help you be the woman you should be instead of this weak, pathetic thing that can't even stand up for herself. Each word was a stone added to the weight she already carried. She stared out the window at the dark landscape blurring past and wondered when she'd become this small, when she'd learned to fold herself up so tightly that she barely existed outside of what Jack needed her to be. They pulled up to the house. Jack killed the engine but didn't get out. You're going to that room above the barn, aren't you? That's what you and Granger cooked up. No, don't lie to me. His fist slammed into the dashboard and she flinched hard. I see the way he looks at you, like you're something worth protecting, like you're special. Jack, I swear, you're not special, Mara. You're ordinary. The only thing you've got going for you is that you can cook, and even that's not as good as you think it is. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were cold sober now, cold mean. You leave me. You've got nothing. No one else is going to want you, not looking like that, not being who you are. He got out of the truck and went into the house. She sat there shaking, his words echoing in her head, mixing with every doubt she'd ever had about herself. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was ordinary. Maybe no one else would want her. Maybe this was as good as it got. She went inside, made herself small, survived the night. And in the morning, when her hands shook while making his coffee, she told herself it was just the cold. But it wasn't the cold. It was the slow breaking foundation of a lie she'd lived too long, and the cracks were starting to show. 3 days later, everything changed. It started with eggs. Mara was at the main house again, preparing breakfast for the early crew before they headed out to move cattle. 5:30 in the morning, dark outside, the kitchen warm from the stove. She was whisking eggs when the back door opened and Cole walked in, earlier than expected. Morning. He stomped snow off his boots. Didn't mean to startle you. You didn't. She poured the eggs into the hot pan, listening to them sizzle. Coffee's ready. You're a blessing. He poured himself a cup, stood watching her work. Can I ask you something? Her shoulders tensed. Sure. That night at the church. What would you have said if your husband wasn't standing right there? The question caught her off guard. She focused on scrambling the eggs, buying herself time. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle but insistent. When I asked if you were all right, if Jack hadn't been there, what would you have said? The eggs blurred. She blinked hard. It doesn't matter what I would have said. He was there. He's not here now. Mr. Granger. Cole. Just Cole. She plated the eggs, added bacon and toast, set it on the table for him. Routine. Stay in the routine. I should start on the lunch prep. Mara. He didn't touch her, didn't move closer, just said her name like it mattered. I need you to hear this. What he does to you, it's not your fault, and it's not okay. And you don't have to live like this. You don't understand. Then help me understand. And maybe it was because it was so early and she was so tired. Maybe it was because he'd asked instead of assumed. Maybe it was because she'd been carrying this weight alone for so long that even a moment of sharing it felt like relief. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "All the time. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, being the wrong thing. I'm afraid of what he'll do if I leave and what he'll do if I stay. I'm afraid that everyone's right, that I'm weak and pathetic and this is exactly what I deserve." "You don't deserve this." Cole's voice was rough. "No one deserves this. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you work harder than anyone on this ranch. I know you're kind to people who don't deserve it. I know you make the best damn stew I've ever had, and you've never once complained about anything, even though you've got more reason than most." He set down his coffee cup. "I know enough." She was crying now, couldn't help it, big, ugly tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "What am I supposed to do? I have nothing, no money, no family close by, no—" "You have skills. You have people who'd help. You have more than you think." He paused. "And you have that room above the barn if you want it." "He'd kill me." The words came out flat, factual, and the look on Cole's face said he didn't think she was exaggerating. "Not on my property, he won't." Cole's expression went hard. "I promise you that. A promise. Like it was that simple. Like a man's word could shield her from the reality of Jack's fists and Jack's anger and Jack's absolute certainty that she belonged to him like equipment, like property. But something in her wanted to believe it. Some small, stubborn part that hadn't been completely beaten down yet. "I need to think about it." "Take your time." Cole picked up his plate. "But Mara, don't take too long. Because one of these days, thinking about it might not be an option anymore." He left her there with that warning and the breakfast dishes and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. She was still thinking about it that evening when Jack came home drunk. Not tipsy, not buzzed, full-on, stumbling, mean drunk. She'd made dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, his favorite, but he took one look at it and swept the plate off the table. It shattered against the wall, gravy and meat sliding down onto the floor. "You think you can disrespect me?" He swayed, pointing at her. "I heard what you did. Crying to Granger, making me look bad. I didn't—" "Shut up!" He grabbed her by the hair, yanked her head back. Pain exploded across her scalp. "I work all day and come home to a wife who's plotting to leave me, who's probably sleeping with my boss behind my back. That's not true." His fist caught her across the jaw. The world went white, then dark at the edges. She tasted blood. He hit her again, this time in the ribs, and she went down hard on the kitchen floor among the broken plate and ruined dinner. "You're nothing," he hissed, standing over her. "You're nothing without me." He kicked her once more, ribs again, and something gave with a crack that stole all her breath, then stumbled to the bedroom. She heard him collapse onto the bed, heard his snoring start minutes later. Mara lay on the floor for a long time. Everything hurt. Breathing hurt. Existing hurt. She thought about staying there, just giving up, letting whatever happened next happen. But that stubborn part, the one that had wanted to believe Cole's promise, that part made her move. She got to her hands and knees, crawled to the bathroom, pulled herself up using the sink and looked at her reflection. Her jaw was already swelling, turning purple. Her lip was split. She lifted her shirt carefully and saw the bruise blooming across her ribs, dark and angry. When she pressed gently, the pain made her gasp. Broken. Probably. Or cracked at minimum. She cleaned herself up as best she could, changed into fresh clothes, moved slowly, carefully, each breath shallow to avoid the stabbing pain. Then she did the math. She could stay. Wait for Jack to wake up, apologize, tell him she'd be better. Live through this cycle again and again until one day he went too far and she didn't get back up. Or she could choose herself. For the first time in years, she could choose herself. Mara packed a bag. Not much. Some clothes, her grandmother's locket, the $23 she'd hidden in a coffee can under the sink. She moved quietly, listening to Jack's snoring, praying it wouldn't stop. It was 3 a.m. when she stepped out into the February cold. The moon was full, bright enough to cast shadows. Her breath plumed in the air. Each step sent pain shooting through her ribs, but she kept walking. The barn was a quarter-mile away. It might as well have been 100 miles. But she walked anyway, one foot in front of the other, carrying her small bag and her breaking body, and the terrifying hope that maybe Cole had meant what he'd said. The barn was dark. She climbed the exterior stairs to the room above, each step in agony. The door was unlocked. Inside was a small space with a bed, a chair, a table, a wood stove that wasn't lit. It was cold and bare, and the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She dropped her bag, sat carefully on the bed, and finally let herself cry. Not quiet tears, but loud, racking sobs that hurt her ribs and her jaw and her heart, but also felt like something breaking open instead of breaking apart. When dawn came, she was still there. And when Cole found her 2 hours later, standing at the bottom of the barn stairs looking up at the light in the window of the room that was supposed to be empty, she watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to fury. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time. She heard his boots on the wood. Then he was knocking, his voice rough with something that might have been fear. "Mara? Mara, open the door." She did. His eyes went to her face, the bruises, the split lip, and his jaw went so tight she heard his teeth grind. "Jesus Christ. I'm sorry," she said automatically. "I didn't know where else." "Don't you dare apologize." He stepped inside and his hands hovered like he wanted to touch her, help her, but was afraid he'd cause more damage. "You need a doctor." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your face looks like—" He stopped, visibly composed himself. "At minimum, you need those ribs looked at. They might be broken." "I can't afford—" "I'll pay for it. That's not even a question." He pulled out a chair, helped her sit. "What happened?" She told him. Not all of it. There wasn't enough time in the world for all of it, but enough. The dinner, the accusations, the beating. His hands clenched into fists while she talked, and she saw murder flash through his eyes before he controlled it. "He's done," Cole said when she finished. "He's off this ranch today. He'll come after me. Let him try." Cole crouched in front of her chair so they were eye level. "I meant what I said, Mara. On my property, you're safe. I'll make sure of it. You can't watch me every second." "No, but I can make it very clear to Jack and everyone else in this valley that if he touches you again, there will be consequences. Legal ones and otherwise." His eyes were fierce. "You took the hardest step, leaving. Let me help with the rest." She wanted to argue, wanted to say she couldn't accept his help, that it wasn't proper, that people would talk. But she was so tired of being alone in this, so tired of pretending she was strong enough to carry it all herself. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." He stood. "First things first, doctor. Then we deal with Jack. One thing at a time." One thing at a time. She could do that. She'd been surviving one moment at a time for years. This was just a different kind of survival. Maybe the kind where she actually lived instead of just existing. Cole helped her down the stairs, his hand gentle on her elbow. The sun was fully up now, bright and cold. Ranch hands were starting their day, and she saw their eyes track to her, saw them register her face in Cole's protective stance. Let them look. Let them see. She was done hiding. Jack was still passed out when Cole went to the house. She waited in Cole's truck, watching through the windshield as Cole disappeared inside and emerged 5 minutes later, his face like stone. "He's awake and packing." Cole started the engine. "I gave him until noon to be gone. Told him if he sets foot on this property after that, I'm calling the sheriff and pressing charges for assault." "He won't just leave." "He will if he knows what's good for him." Cole's voice was hard. "I also told him you're filing for divorce and that any attempt to contact you goes through a lawyer." Divorce. The word hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible and terrifying. "I can't afford a lawyer." "Already handled. Friend of mine in town owes me a favor." He glanced at her. "You don't have to do this, Mara, but if you want to, the path is there. A path. Out of the trap. Away from the man who'd spent years teaching her she was worthless." "I want to," she heard herself say. "I want a divorce." And saying it out loud felt like the first true thing she'd said in years. Cole drove her to the doctor in town. Dr. Sarah Chen was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who took one look at Mara's face and immediately ushered her into an exam room. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. 2 cracked ribs. Severe bruising. Possible jaw fracture, but nothing that needed setting. Dr. Chen wrapped the ribs, gave her pain medication, and handed her a card for a women's shelter in the next county. Just in case, Dr. Chen said quietly. You have options. Options. Everyone kept telling her that. Maybe it was time to start believing them. When they got back to the ranch, Jack's truck was gone. The small house they'd shared was empty, clothes and belongings cleared out. He'd left the place a mess, drawers open, trash on the floor, a final act of petty cruelty. Mara stood in the doorway looking at the wreckage of her former life and felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief. Just a hollow numbness that might eventually fill with something else. You don't have to go in there, Cole said behind her. I need to get some things. I'll help. Together they salvaged what mattered. Photos of her parents, her grandmother's quilt, kitchen equipment that was actually hers. It took an hour. When they were done, Cole locked the door behind them. I'll have someone clean it out properly, he said. Get it ready for the next hire. The next hire. Someone else's life would happen in that house. Maybe a happier one. That night, Mara lay in the bed above the barn, listening to the wind howl outside and the wood stove crackle. Her ribs hurt, her face hurt, everything hurt. But she was alone. Truly alone for the first time in years. No one was going to come through that door angry. No one was going to tell her she was worthless. No one was going to hit her for crimes she didn't commit. She was alone. And maybe, eventually, that would feel like freedom. The whispers started before Mara had even finished unpacking. She heard them 3 days after moving into the room above the barn, when she came down to start breakfast prep, and found two of the younger ranch hands, Danny Cortez and Mike something, she never caught his last name, standing by the water trough. Voices low, but not low enough. I'm just saying, it's weird. Boss man giving her special treatment like that. Her husband beat the hell out of her, Danny. You saw her face. Yeah, but moving her into the barn, paying for her doctor, that's not normal boss behavior. What's he supposed to do, throw her out on the street? I'm not saying that, I'm just saying people are going to talk. Mara's hands tightened on the basket of eggs she was carrying. She should have known, should have expected it. A woman doesn't leave her husband and move onto her boss's property without tongues wagging. Didn't matter that her ribs were still taped up or that she couldn't look at herself in the mirror without seeing Jack's handiwork. People would make it dirty because that's what people did. She walked past them with her head up, and both men had the decency to look ashamed when they saw her. Danny mumbled something that might have been an apology. She didn't acknowledge it. Inside the main house kitchen, she found Cole already there, coffee in hand, reading through what looked like feed invoices. He glanced up when she entered. Morning. How'd you sleep? Fine. It was a lie. She'd barely slept at all, every creak of the barn making her think Jack had come back. But Cole didn't need to carry that too. He studied her face for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he saw right through her. The lawyer can see you Thursday at 2. I'll drive you into town. You don't have to, Mara. He set down his coffee. We're going to have this conversation a lot, aren't we? Me offering help, you saying I don't have to, me doing it anyway? Despite everything, she almost smiled. Probably. Then let's just skip to the part where you say thank you, and I say you're welcome, and we both save some time. Thank you. You're welcome. He went back to his invoices. Also, I'm putting you on the payroll officially, $60 a week plus room and board. You're doing the work, you should get paid for it. $60 a week. It wasn't a fortune, but it was hers. Money she earned, money she controlled. The concept felt foreign and wonderful and slightly terrifying. That's generous. That's fair. You cook for 12 men 3 times a day during busy season and keep this kitchen running better than it has since my wife died. You're worth more than 60, but that's what the budget allows right now. He looked up again. And before you argue, I already cleared it with my accountant. It's done. She wanted to argue anyway, but his expression said it would be pointless. Okay. Good. Now make me those biscuits you do with the honey butter before I waste away to nothing. This time she did smile, small and fleeting, but real. She set to work, falling into the familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing. Cole worked in companionable silence across the kitchen, and for a few moments, everything felt almost normal. The almost shattered when the door banged open and Thomas Brennan walked in. Mara's hands stilled in the dough. Cole was on his feet immediately, positioning himself between Thomas and her. You're not welcome here, Thomas. That's a hell of a greeting, Granger. Thomas's eyes, so much like Jack's but colder, found Mara over Cole's shoulder. I'm just here to talk to my sister-in-law. That a crime? Depends on what you want to talk about. Family business, private business. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. So maybe you could give us a minute? No. Cole's voice was flat. Whatever you have to say, you can say it with me standing right here. Thomas's jaw clenched. Fine. Mara, Jack wants to talk. Work things out. He's real sorry about what happened. Get out. The words came from Mara, sharp and sudden. Both men turned to look at her. She stepped out from behind Cole, flowers still on her hands, fear still in her chest. But something else there too. Something that felt like anger. Get out of this kitchen. Now hold on. You knew. Her voice shook but held. You knew what he was doing to me. I saw you at family dinners, saw you see the bruises, and you never said a damn word. You laughed when he made jokes about keeping me in line. You told him he was lucky to have a woman who knew her place. Thomas's face reddened. That's not... So you don't get to come in here now and tell me he's sorry. You don't get to act like this is something that can be worked out over coffee and a conversation. She took a step forward, and Thomas actually backed up. You tell Jack that I'm filing for divorce. You tell him if he wants to communicate, it goes through my lawyer. And you tell him that if he or you or anyone else comes near me again, I'll make sure Sheriff Davies knows exactly what's been happening. You threatening me? I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. For a long moment, Thomas just stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then he looked at Cole. You putting her up to this? She doesn't need me to put her up to anything. Cole's voice was quiet, but edged with steel. She just needed someone to stop getting in her way. Now you heard the lady. Get off my property. Thomas pointed at Mara. You're making a mistake. Jack's not going to just let this go. That sounds like a threat, Cole said. Want to make it official so I can call the sheriff right now? Thomas's hand twitched toward his belt, and Mara's heart stopped. But he just adjusted his buckle and backed toward the door. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. Cole followed him to the door, closed it firmly behind him, and locked it. Then he turned to Mara. You okay? She was shaking. Now that Thomas was gone and the adrenaline was fading, her whole body trembled like a leaf in high wind. I don't know. You did good. You stood your ground. I'm terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do it anyway. He pulled out a chair. Sit down before you fall down. She sat. Her hands were still shaking. Cole poured her a glass of water and she drank it in small sips while her heart rate slowly returned to something resembling normal. He's going to tell Jack, she said finally. Probably. Jack's going to be furious. Definitely. So what do I do? Cole sat across from her and his expression was serious. You keep doing exactly what you're doing. You go see the lawyer Thursday, you file the papers, you work and you live, and you don't let fear make you small again. He paused. And you trust that I meant what I said about keeping you safe. What if you can't? Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But Mara, you can't live your life around what ifs. Jack's already stolen years from you. Don't let him steal your future too by being afraid of ghosts. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that standing up for herself wouldn't end in disaster. But years of conditioning didn't vanish in a few days, and the fear was still there, sharp and insistent. What if I'm not strong enough? You left him. You walked out of that house with cracked ribs and a split lip and you chose yourself. That's the hardest part. Everything after is just details. She wasn't sure she believed that, but she nodded anyway because what else could she do? Go back? Apologize? Spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been if she'd just been a little braver? No. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. The rest of the week passed in a strange kind of limbo. Mara cooked, cleaned, tried to establish some kind of routine in her new life. The room above the barn became familiar. She learned which floorboards creaked, where the stove ran hottest, how the wind sounded different up high. At night, she lay awake listening for trucks on the road, for footsteps on the stairs, for Jack's voice telling her she couldn't escape. But he never came. Thursday arrived cold and gray, threatening snow. Cole drove her into town in his truck, the radio playing low between them. Mara watched the familiar landscape roll past. The Peterson Ranch, the old Miller place that had been abandoned for years, the turnoff to the highway that led to bigger towns and bigger possibilities. Nervous? Cole asked. Terrified. Want to turn back? She considered it. No. Good. The lawyer's office was above the hardware store on Main Street. Robert Chen, Dr. Chen's husband, which explained the favor, was a small man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He ushered them into an office that smelled like old paper and coffee. Mrs. Brennan, thank you for coming in. He gestured to a chair. Cole, you can wait outside if... I'd like him to stay, Mara said quickly. If that's all right. Of course. Robert pulled out a legal pad. Let's start with the basics. You want to file for divorce from Jackson Brennan on what grounds? He beat me. The words came easier than she expected. For 3 years. He threatened me, controlled me, isolated me from anyone who might help. And when I finally left, he told his brother to tell me it was a mistake. Robert wrote steadily. Do you have documentation? Medical records, police reports. Dr. Chen treated me last week. She documented the injuries. Mara's hands twisted in her lap. But I never called the police. I was too scared. That's all right. Medical records will help. Do you have witnesses? Anyone who saw the abuse or the aftermath? Cole did, and some of the ranch hands saw the bruises, though they never said anything. I'll testify, Cole said from his position by the window. Whatever you need. Robert nodded. Good. Wyoming allows divorce on grounds of cruel and inhuman treatment. Given the documented injuries and witness testimony, we have a strong case. He paused. The challenge is going to be Jack. Has he agreed to the divorce? I haven't asked him. I just left. Which is legally your right, but it means this might get contentious. He could contest it, drag it out, try to make it difficult. Robert's expression was sympathetic. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Brennan. This could be a fight. I don't care. Mara's voice was steady. I want out. Whatever it takes. All right then, I'll draw up the papers and file them with the county clerk. Jack will be served and then he'll have 30 days to respond. If he contests, we go to court. If he doesn't, it's a simple matter of the judge signing off. How long does it usually take? Contested? Could be months. Uncontested? 6 to 8 weeks. Months. The words settled heavy in her chest. Months of waiting, of looking over her shoulder, of wondering when Jack would make his move. But it was still better than a lifetime. They spent another hour going over details, property division, which was simple since they owned almost nothing, her testimony, which Robert said they'd prepare carefully, and the cost, which Cole insisted on covering before Mara could even open her mouth to argue. When they finally left the office, Mara felt wrung out and oddly lighter at the same time. Papers would be filed. The law would be involved. This was real now, official, a thing that was happening whether Jack liked it or not. How do you feel? Cole asked as they walked back to the truck. Like I just jumped off a cliff, and I'm not sure if there's water at the bottom. There is. And you're a stronger swimmer than you think. She glanced at him. You have a lot of faith in me. Someone should. They were almost to the truck when Mara saw them, a group of women outside the general store. Mrs. Henderson, Margaret Dawson, and 3 others whose names she couldn't remember. They saw her too, and the conversation stopped dead. Mara felt Cole tense beside her, but she made herself walk steady, made herself meet their eyes. Mrs. Henderson recovered first, her smile brittle and bright. Mara, how are you, dear? We heard about, well, the situation. I'm fine, thank you. Such a difficult time. Margaret's eyes traveled over Mara's face, cataloging the fading bruises with what might have been satisfaction. We're all praying for you. The words felt like rocks wrapped in velvet. That's kind. Of course people are talking. This from one of the other women, a pinch-faced blonde Mara thought might be married to the bank manager. About you living out at the ranch now, unchaperoned. The implication hung in the cold air. Cole's hand landed on Mara's shoulder, gentle and grounding. Mrs. Brennan lives in a separate building on my property and works as my cook, Cole said, his voice pleasant and absolutely unyielding. If anyone has questions about the propriety of that arrangement, they're welcome to come discuss it with me directly. Oh, we didn't mean... Mrs. Henderson fluttered. Yes, you did. Cole's smile didn't reach his eyes. And I'm telling you it's none of your concern. Mrs. Brennan left an abusive situation, and she's rebuilding her life. If this town can't support that, then maybe this town needs to take a hard look at itself. Margaret's face went red. Well, I never... Good day, ladies. Cole steered Mara toward the truck. She waited until they were inside with the doors closed before she spoke. You just made enemies of half the church social committee. They were never friends to begin with. He started the engine. They're the kind of people who care more about appearances than reality, more worried about what it looks like than what it is. What it looks like is a woman living alone with a man who's not her husband. And what it is a woman getting back on her feet with the help of someone who actually gives a damn. He pulled onto the road. I know which one matters. Mara watched the town disappear in the side mirror. It's going to get worse, isn't it? The talk. Probably. Small towns love their gossip. He glanced at her. Can you handle it? Could she? A week ago, the thought of people talking about her would have sent her into a panic. But she'd just filed for divorce. She'd stood up to Thomas. She'd looked Margaret Dawson in the eye and not apologized for existing. I think so. Then that's all that matters. But it did get worse. By Sunday, the rumors had spread like wildfire through the valley. Mara heard them secondhand. From Danny, who apologized for the gossip while simultaneously reporting it. From Dr. Chen, who called to check on her ribs and mentioned she'd heard some unkind talk at the market. From Cole himself, who came back from town tight-jawed and angry. The stories varied in detail but shared a theme. Mara had left her husband for her boss. She was having an affair. She'd probably been having an affair for months, and poor Jack had finally found out and reacted badly, as any man would. The whole thing was a scandal, and decent people were appalled. They're saying I seduced you, Mara told Cole over dinner in the main house kitchen. She'd started eating with him in the evenings, partly because it was easier than cooking twice, and partly because the room above the barn felt too quiet sometimes. That I trapped you into helping me. People will say anything to make sense of something that challenges their worldview. Cole stabbed at his pot roast. Easier to believe you're a seductress than to accept that one of their own was beating his wife and they all looked the other way. It makes you look bad too, like you're taking advantage. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's enough. But it wasn't enough for the town council, apparently. They came Tuesday morning, Mayor Dawson and 2 council members, one of whom owned the feed store where the ranch did business. Cole met them on the porch while Mara watched nervously from the kitchen window. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Cole's body language shift from relaxed to rigid. His jaw set, his hands clenched. One of the council members pointed toward the barn, then at the house, gesturing emphatically. When they finally left, Cole came inside looking like he wanted to hit something. What did they want? Mara asked. They want you gone. His voice was flat. Said your presence on the ranch is causing a scandal. Bad for the town's reputation. Bad for business. Her stomach dropped. What did you tell them? I told them to go to hell. He poured himself coffee with shaking hands. Told them what happens on my property is my business, and if they don't like it, they can take their moral outrage somewhere it might actually matter. Cole, they threatened to pull the feed store contract, said other businesses might follow suit. He laughed, sharp and bitter. Trying to pressure me into throwing you out by threatening my livelihood. Mara felt sick. Then maybe I should... Don't! He turned to face her. Don't you dare finish that sentence. You're not leaving because some small-minded hypocrites can't handle a woman making her own choices. But if it's hurting you, then it's hurting me. That's my problem, not yours. His eyes were fierce. You think I care more about a feed contract than doing the right thing? You think I built this ranch by backing down every time someone didn't like what I was doing? No, but... No buts. You're staying. I'm keeping you on payroll. And if the whole damn town wants to boycott me over it, then I'll find other towns to do business with. He set down his coffee cup hard enough that it rattled. I'm done caring what they think. The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but all Mara could think about was how much he was sacrificing for her. How much easier his life would be if she just disappeared. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Why fight so hard for someone you barely know? Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. My wife, Elizabeth. She had a friend, woman named Sarah, who was married to a man who hit her. Elizabeth saw the bruises, offered her a place to stay, begged her to leave. Sarah always said no, always made excuses. He looked out the window. One day Sarah's husband went too far, put her in the hospital. She died 3 days later. Mara's hand went to her mouth. Elizabeth blamed herself, said she should have done more, should have pushed harder, should have made Sarah leave whether she wanted to or not. Cole's jaw worked. She made me promise that if I ever saw someone in that situation again, I wouldn't look away. Wouldn't make it easy on myself by pretending it wasn't my business. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just stay. Just let me keep the promise I made to my wife. He finally looked at her. You're not a burden, Mara. You're a person who deserves better than what you got. And if helping you costs me a few business contracts, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold the weight of his conviction, his loss, his determination to make something right that had gone so wrong before. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. Now finish your dinner before it gets cold. That night, lying in her bed above the barn, Mara thought about choices. She'd made one when she left Jack. Now she was making another by staying, by not running when things got hard, by letting Cole fight for her even when it cost him. It felt selfish. It felt necessary. It felt like the first time in her life she'd put herself first and meant it. The divorce papers were served Friday morning. Sheriff Davies delivered them himself to Jack's new place, a rundown trailer on the edge of town that Thomas had helped him secure. According to Robert Chen, who called Cole with an update, Jack had taken one look at the papers and thrown the sheriff off his property. That's not a good sign, Robert said over the phone, his voice tinny through the receiver. Cole had it on speaker so Mara could hear. He's going to contest. Probably try to paint you as the one at fault. On what grounds? Cole asked. Adultery. Abandonment. Whatever he can make stick. Doesn't matter if it's true, just matters if he can create enough doubt. Mara felt cold. Can he win? Not if we're prepared. But it means we're going to trial, and that means you'll have to testify. Talk about the abuse publicly, in front of a judge and whoever else shows up to watch. The thought made her want to vomit. Standing in a courtroom, recounting every humiliation, every beating, every moment Jack had made her feel small, with Jack sitting there watching, with the town watching, with everyone watching. I'll do it, she said before she could talk herself out of it. You're sure? No. But I'll do it anyway. After Robert hung up, Cole poured them both whiskey. Mara rarely drank, but tonight felt like an exception. The liquor burned going down and settled warm in her stomach. You don't have to do this alone, Cole said. I'll be there. Robert will be there. You'll have support. I know. She took another sip. I'm still terrified. Good. Means you're smart. He swirled his own glass. Fear isn't the enemy. Letting fear make your decisions for you is. When did you get so wise? When I lost everything I loved and had to figure out how to keep going. His smile was sad. Turns out survival teaches you things, whether you want to learn them or not. They sat in silence for a while, drinking whiskey and watching the fire burn low in the stove. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Winter was tightening its grip on the valley, and somewhere out there, Jack was reading divorce papers and planning his next move. But for now, in this moment, Mara was warm and safe and not alone. And that was enough. The first brick came through the window 3 nights later. Mara was already in bed, halfway to sleep despite the wind howling outside, when she heard the crash of glass exploding inward. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and saw the jagged hole in the window above her small table. Cold air poured through. On the floor, surrounded by glittering shards, sat a red brick with paper wrapped around it. Her hand shook as she picked it up, careful of the glass. The paper was secured with twine. She unwound it slowly, already knowing it would be nothing good. The message was short, written in angry block letters. Homewrecker. Get out while you still can. She sat on the edge of the bed, brick in one hand, note in the other, and felt something crack inside her. Not fear this time. Anger. Pure, hot, clarifying anger that burned through the numbness she'd been carrying. Someone had driven out here in the dark, had stood outside her window, had thrown this brick with enough force to shatter glass and probably hoped to hit her while they were at it. And for what? Because she'd left a man who beat her? Because she dared to exist outside the neat little box the town wanted to keep her in? She was still sitting there when she heard boots pounding up the exterior stairs. Cole's voice, rough with worry, came through the door. Mara, you okay? I heard the crash. She unlocked the door and handed him the brick. He read the note, and his face went dark. Goddamn cowards. He looked at the broken window, then back at her. Pack a bag. You're sleeping in the main house tonight. I'm not leaving. It's 20 degrees outside and you have a hole in your window. You'll freeze before morning. He was already moving, crunching across broken glass to examine the damage. I'll board this up tonight and get it replaced tomorrow. But right now, you're coming with me. She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she wasn't scared that some anonymous threat wouldn't chase her out of the space she'd claimed as hers. But her teeth were already chattering from the cold pouring in, and the anger was giving way to exhaustion. Okay. She threw some clothes in a bag while Cole found a piece of plywood in the barn and nailed it over the broken window. The hammering echoed in the cold night, loud enough to wake the dead. When he was done, they walked together to the main house, their breath fogging in the air. Cole set her up in his guest room, his late wife's sewing room, converted after Elizabeth died. It was small but warm, with a bed that had actual quilts instead of the thin blankets Mara had been using. She sat on the edge of it while Cole built up the fire in the small stove. You should try to sleep, he said, straightening up. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything. Cole. She looked at the brick he'd carried in, now sitting on the dresser like evidence. What if it gets worse? Then we deal with it. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the frame. But Mara, you need to understand something. These people, whoever threw that brick, whoever's spreading rumors, whoever's trying to make you leave, they're betting on you being too scared to fight back. They're betting you'll do what you've always done, which is make yourself small and disappear. Maybe I should. And maybe they should mind their own business and let a woman escape an abusive marriage without turning it into a public spectacle. His voice was hard. You didn't do anything wrong. Remember that. After he left, Mara lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the fear. She'd thought leaving Jack would be the hard part. She hadn't counted on the town turning against her, too. Morning came gray and cold. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and found Cole already in the kitchen, frying eggs with the competence of a man who'd been cooking for himself for years. Sleep okay? He asked. Not really. Yeah, me neither. He plated the eggs, added bacon and toast. I called Sheriff Davies. He's coming out to take a report. It won't do any good. They didn't sign the note. Probably not. But it creates a record. If things escalate, we'll need it. He set breakfast in front of her. Eat. You look like a strong wind could blow you over. She picked at the food while Cole ate with mechanical efficiency. When Sheriff Davies arrived an hour later, he examined the brick and the note with the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Can't do much with this, he said, turning the brick over in his hands. Sheriff Davies was in his 50s, gray-haired and perpetually tired-looking. No witnesses, no signature, could be anyone. So what, we just wait for them to try again? Cole's voice was tight. I'll make a report. Patrol out here more often. But Mara, the sheriff's eyes were sympathetic but practical. You stirred up a hornet's nest with this divorce. People have strong feelings about marriage, about women leaving their husbands. Sometimes the best thing is to let it blow over. By leaving town? Mara asked quietly. Davies shifted his weight. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. And sometimes standing your ground is the only way to stop bullies from winning, Cole said. She's not leaving. Do your job, Sheriff. After Davies left, Mara helped Cole clean up the broken glass. The new window wouldn't arrive for 3 days, so the plywood would have to do. She stared at the note lying on her table, those angry letters that reduced her entire life to one ugly word. I'm making it harder for you, she said. The town, the business contracts, now this. You'd be better off if I left. Cole stopped sweeping. You want to know why I'm really fighting for you? You told me. Your wife, her friend, that's part of it. But the other part is simpler. He leaned on the broom handle. I'm tired of watching people get away with cruelty because it's easier than standing up to them. I'm tired of women being punished for leaving men who hurt them. And I'm tired of living in a town that claims to care about family and morality while turning a blind eye to abuse. His eyes met hers. You staying, you fighting, it matters. Not just for you, for every other woman watching to see if it's possible. The weight of that settled on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who'd ever felt trapped, who'd ever been told to endure, who'd ever wondered if escape was possible. It should have felt like too much. Instead, it felt like purpose. The next week brought a different kind of attack. The feed store followed through on their threat and canceled the ranch's contract. 2 other businesses did the same, the veterinary supply company and the equipment rental place Cole used for seasonal work. Then Mrs. Henderson showed up at the main house with a delegation of church ladies. Mara was kneading bread dough when they arrived, 6 women in their Sunday best despite it being Tuesday. Cole had gone into town, so she was alone. She wiped flour from her hands and met them at the door. "Mrs. Brennan," Mrs. Henderson's smile was strained. "We'd like to talk to you. May we come in?" Every instinct screamed to say no, but Mara stepped aside and let them file into the kitchen, where they arranged themselves like a jury. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself spokesman. "We're here out of concern for you, dear. This situation you found yourself in, the situation where I left my abusive husband?" The women exchanged glances. Margaret Dawson, looking pinched and righteous, spoke up. "We understand marriage can be difficult, but divorce is a very serious step. Have you truly exhausted all other options?" "All other options?" Mara heard her voice rise and didn't care. "You mean like the 3 years I spent trying to be good enough, quiet enough, small enough to avoid being hit? Those options?" "There are ways to manage difficult husbands," says Mrs. Henderson began. "Manage." The word tasted like acid. "You want me to manage being punched in the ribs hard enough to crack them? Manage being told I'm worthless every single day? Manage living in fear that one day he'll go too far and I'll end up dead?" "Now you're being dramatic," Margaret said. "Jack has his faults, but he's not a murderer." "Yet." Mara's hands clenched into fists. "He's not a murderer yet, and the only reason he's not is because I left before he got the chance." Another woman, younger than the rest, ventured, "But surely living here alone with Mr. Granger isn't appropriate. I have my own room. I work for him. That's all." Mara's voice was shaking now. "But you know what? Even if it wasn't, even if I was sleeping with him every night, which I'm not, it would still be none of your business. I'm not your child or your property or your project to fix." "We're trying to help you," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice going sharp. "You're making yourself a pariah. People are talking, judging. If you continue down this path, you'll be an outcast. Then I'll be an outcast." The words came out strong and sure. "Because I'd rather be alone and free than accepted and trapped." The silence that followed was arctic. Finally, Margaret stood, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. "You're making a terrible mistake. Jack may not be perfect, but he's your husband. You made vows." "He broke them first, every time he hit me." "That's not how marriage works. Then maybe marriage is broken." Mara met each of their eyes in turn. Maybe a system that tells women to endure abuse for the sake of vows is a system that needs to change. They left in a flurry of disapproval and rustling skirts. Mara watched them go, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and something that felt dangerously close to triumph. She'd just told off the church social committee. She'd just declared war on everything she'd been raised to believe about women and marriage and keeping the peace. And it felt incredible. When Cole came home an hour later, she told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "You think I went too far?" she asked when she finished. "I think you told the truth. Sometimes the truth goes too far for people who've been living comfortably with lies." He pulled out a chair, sat heavily. "But I should tell you, there's going to be a town meeting next week. About us." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "Mayor called it. Says there are concerns about moral standards in the community that need to be addressed." His mouth twisted. "Which is code for, let's publicly shame Mara until she leaves." "Can they do that?" "It's a public forum. Anyone can bring up anything." He rubbed his face tiredly. "Robert says we should go. Show we're not hiding, not ashamed. Let people have their say and then move on." "I can't stand in front of the whole town." "You just stood up to the church ladies. This is the same thing. Just more of them." He reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. "I'll be right there with you. You won't be alone." The meeting was set for Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community hall. Mara spent the week in a state of low-grade panic, barely eating, sleeping in fits and starts. Cole tried to keep her busy with work, but her mind kept circling back to the same terrifying thought. She was going to have to face the entire town and defend her right to exist. Thursday arrived too quickly. Mara changed clothes 3 times, trying to find something that looked respectable but not apologetic. She finally settled on a simple gray dress and her grandmother's locket, armor in fabric form. The community hall was packed when they arrived, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. Mara felt every eye turn toward her as she walked in with Cole. The whispers started immediately, a low hiss that followed them to the front row where Robert Chen had saved seats. "Deep breaths," Robert murmured. "Let them talk themselves out. Don't engage unless I tell you to." Mayor Dawson called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. He was a portly man with a red face and the self-important air of someone who took his small power very seriously. "We're here tonight to discuss a matter of community standards," he began. "Specifically, the situation involving Mrs. Mara Brennan and Mr. Cole Granger." "What situation would that be, Mayor?" Cole's voice cut through the murmurs. "Be specific." Dawson's face reddened further. "The situation of a married woman living on the property of a single man. It's unseemly. It reflects poorly on our town's values." "Mrs. Brennan is in the process of divorcing an abusive husband," Robert said calmly. "She works as Mr. Granger's cook and lives in separate quarters. There's nothing unseemly about employment." "Employment?" someone shouted from the back. "That what we're calling it now?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mara's face burned. Cole started to stand, but Robert put a hand on his arm. Margaret Dawson stood, her voice ringing clear. "The issue isn't employment, it's propriety. A woman's place is with her husband, for better or worse. Mrs. Brennan abandoned her marital duties." "Her marital duties?" Mara found herself on her feet, the words ripping out of her. "My duty was to let him beat me? To smile and cook and clean while he told me I was worthless?" The room went silent. Margaret's mouth opened and closed. "You all saw the bruises," Mara continued, her voice shaking but holding. "Don't pretend you didn't. Mrs. Henderson saw them. Margaret, you saw them. Half this town saw them and said nothing because it was easier to look away than to acknowledge what was happening." "Jack says you're lying," someone called out. "Says you're trying to ruin him because you found someone better." "Jack lies." Mara's hands clenched at her sides. "He lied every time he told people I was clumsy. He lied every time he said he was a good husband. And he's lying now because the truth makes him look like exactly what he is. A man who beats women because it makes him feel powerful." "That's slander!" Thomas Brennan stood up from the back. "You can't just throw around accusations." "They're not accusations when they're documented by a doctor," Robert said, pulling out a folder. "I have medical records here showing the extent of Mrs. Brennan's injuries. Cracked ribs, bruising consistent with being struck multiple times, a split lip, a nearly fractured jaw. All treated by Dr. Chen on the night Mrs. Brennan fled her home." He held up photographs, stark clinical images of Mara's bruised body. She hadn't known he'd gotten copies, hadn't known they'd be shown like this, her private pain made public. But as she looked around the room and saw faces going pale, saw people shifting uncomfortably, she realized this was what they needed. Not her words. Proof. "Now," Robert continued, "you can choose to believe whatever narrative makes you comfortable, but the medical evidence doesn't lie. Mrs. Brennan was abused. She left. Mr. Granger offered her employment and safe housing. That's not a scandal. That's basic human decency." The room erupted, people shouting over each other, some defending Mara, others still convinced she was in the wrong. Mayor Dawson banged his gavel uselessly, trying to restore order. Then the door at the back opened, and Jack walked in. The room went silent. Every head turned. Jack looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, thinner than Mara remembered, but his eyes, when they found her, were sharp and mean. "I have something to say," his voice carried across the sudden quiet. Mayor Dawson hesitated. "Mr. Brennan, this isn't... I have a right to defend myself against these lies." Jack walked down the center aisle, and Mara felt Cole tense beside her. "My wife is sitting there telling everyone I beat her, making me out to be some kind of monster, but she's leaving out the part where she was carrying on with Granger behind my back." "That's not true," Mara said. "No?" Jack stopped a few feet away. "Then why'd you run to him first thing? Why's he paying for your lawyer, your doctor, putting you up in his house, because he's a decent human being, something you wouldn't recognize. Jack's face twisted. I loved you. I gave you everything, and you threw it away for him. You gave me bruises and fear and years of my life I'll never get back. Mara stood, facing him fully for the first time since she'd left. You didn't love me, Jack. You owned me. And the second I stopped letting you, you couldn't handle it. You're my wife. Not for much longer. Her voice was steady now, clear. The divorce papers are filed. In a few months, I'll be free of you, and there's nothing you can do about it. The room held its breath. Jack's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment Mara thought he might hit her right there in front of everyone. But Cole stood, positioned himself between them, and the moment passed. You're making a mistake, Jack said, his voice dropping to something that might have been pleading if it wasn't edged with threat. You can't make it out there alone. You need me. No, Mara said. I really don't. Jack stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Mayor Dawson cleared his throat. Well, I think we've heard enough for tonight. This meeting is... Actually, I'm not done. Cole's voice cut through the rustling. You all came here tonight to judge Mara, to decide if she deserves your approval. But here's the thing. She doesn't need it. She doesn't need your permission to leave a man who hurt her. She doesn't need your blessing to rebuild her life. And she sure as hell doesn't need you to believe her, because the truth exists whether you acknowledge it or not. He looked around the room, making eye contact with person after person. What she does need is for you to stop making it harder. Stop spreading rumors. Stop throwing bricks through windows. Stop treating her like she's the problem when the only thing she did wrong was survive. His voice was hard as stone. If this town can't handle a woman choosing herself over a man who beat her, then this town has bigger problems than gossip to worry about. The silence after he finished was total. Then, from the middle of the room, someone started clapping. It was Dr. Chen. Then her husband joined in. Then a few others, Danny from the ranch, the owner of the diner, a handful of people Mara barely knew. It wasn't everyone, not even close to half. But it was enough to break the spell of collective judgment. Mayor Dawson banged his gavel. Meeting adjourned. People filed out in clusters, still arguing. Mara stood rooted to the spot, shaking from head to toe. Robert packed up his folder of evidence. Cole's hand landed gently on her shoulder. You did good, he said quietly. You stood your ground. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. He steered her toward the door. Let's get you home. Home. The word settled strange in her chest. The ranch wasn't really her home. The room above the barn was temporary, but it felt more like home than anywhere else had in years. They were almost to the truck when someone called out, Mrs. Brennan, wait! Mara turned to find a woman she didn't recognize, late 20s, dark hair, nervous eyes. I just wanted to say, thank you for speaking up, for not backing down. I don't understand. The woman's hand went to her own arm, rubbing it unconsciously. My husband, he's not as bad as yours was, but sometimes he gets angry. And I always thought I just had to deal with it, you know? That's what wives do. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But watching you tonight, I realized maybe I don't have to. Mara's throat closed. You don't. You really don't. The woman nodded, squeezed Mara's hand once, and hurried away. Mara watched her go, feeling the weight of what she'd done settle differently. Not just fighting for herself, showing someone else it was possible. On the drive back to the ranch, Cole was quiet. Mara stared out the window at the dark landscape, processing everything that had happened. The confrontation with Jack, the photographs, the applause that hadn't been applause so much as acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, she wasn't the villain in this story. That woman who talked to you, Cole said finally. You know what you did for her? Scared her, probably. Gave her hope. He glanced at her. Showed her there's a way out if she wants it. That's worth all the rest of this mess. Maybe it was. Maybe the town meeting and the rumors and the brick through the window were all worth it if even one person saw a path they hadn't seen before. But when they pulled up to the ranch and Mara saw her room above the barn with its plywood-covered window, she couldn't help wondering how much more she could take before something broke that couldn't be fixed. That answer came sooner than she expected. 2 days after the town meeting, Jack came back. Mara was alone in the main house kitchen, preparing lunch for the crew working on the south fence line. Cole had driven into the next county to negotiate with a feed supplier willing to work with him despite the local boycott. The ranch hands were all out in the pastures. She had the place to herself, radio playing low, her hands busy with pie dough. She didn't hear the truck pull up, didn't hear the door open. The first warning she had was his voice. "You think you can just humiliate me like that?" She spun around. Jack stood in the doorway, and the look on his face sent ice through her veins. He was drunk. She could smell it from across the room, but not the sloppy drunk she was used to. This was focused drunk, angry drunk, dangerous drunk. "You need to leave." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You're not supposed to be here." "Not supposed to be here." He stepped inside, letting the door slam behind him. "This is my town, my valley. You don't get to tell me where I can and can't go." Cole said, "I don't give a damn what Granger said." He moved closer, and Mara backed up until she hit the counter. "You stood up in front of everyone and called me a liar. Showed them pictures like I'm some kind of animal. You put me in the hospital, Jack. I never touched you that hard. You're exaggerating like you always do." His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. "Making me look bad so you can run off with your rich rancher." "I'm not running off with anyone. I'm leaving you because you beat me." She tried to edge toward the door, but he moved to block her. "Please just go, before someone comes back." "Before Granger comes back, you mean? Before your protector shows up to save you." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think he actually cares about you? He just wants what every man wants, and once he gets it, he'll throw you away too." "That's not true, isn't it?" He was close enough now that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're not special, Mara. You're just convenient, easy." He saw a woman in trouble and figured he'd play hero, get himself a grateful woman in his bed. "Get out!" Her hands found the counter behind her, gripping the edge. "Get out now or I'll scream." "Go ahead. No one's close enough to hear you." His hand shot out and grabbed her arm, fingers digging into the same spot he'd bruised 100 times before. "You're coming home. We're going to walk out of here, get in my truck, and you're going to tell everyone you made a mistake." "No." The word came out firm despite the pain in her arm. "I'm not going anywhere with you." His other hand came up to her throat. Not squeezing yet, just resting there, a threat. "You don't get to say no to me. You're my wife." "Not for long." The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. Stars burst in her vision. But something in Mara was different now. The fear was still there, but it was wrapped in something harder, something that had been building since the night she packed her bag, since the town meeting, since she'd looked him in the eye and told the truth. When he raised his hand again, she moved. Her hand closed around the rolling pin on the counter. She swung it with everything she had, catching him across the forearm. He yelped and jerked back, and she swung again, this time connecting with his shoulder. "You crazy?" He lunged at her, but she was already moving, putting the kitchen table between them. "Stay back!" She brandished the rolling pin like a weapon. "I swear I'll crack your skull open." "You don't have the guts." "Try me." For a moment they stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other across the table. Then Jack feinted left, and when she moved to counter, he went right, faster than she expected. His hand closed around her wrist, twisting until she dropped the rolling pin. It clattered to the floor. He yanked her close, his face inches from hers. "You're going to regret this. All of it. The divorce, the lawyer, Granger. I'm going to make sure." The door crashed open. Cole stood there, and the look on his face was murder. "Get your hands off her." Jack's grip loosened slightly. "This is between me and my wife. She's not your wife anymore. Not in any way that matters." Cole moved into the room, and Mara had never seen him like this. All the careful control was gone, replaced by something raw and furious. "And you just broke the law by coming here. Violated the restraining order Robert filed last week." "There's no restraining order." "There is now. You were served yesterday at your trailer, which means you're trespassing and in violation of a court order." Cole pulled out his cell phone. "Sheriff's on speed dial. Want me to call him, or do you want to leave on your own?" Jack's hand tightened on Mara's wrist, and she gasped. Cole saw it, and something snapped in him. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, grabbed Jack by the shoulder, and physically hauled him away from Mara. Jack stumbled back, hit the counter, and came up swinging. The fight was brief and brutal. Jack got in one punch that split Cole's lip. Cole responded with a combination that put Jack on the floor, blood streaming from his nose. When Jack tried to get up, Cole planted a boot on his chest. "Stay down." His voice was cold. "You move again, I'll break something." Jack stayed down, breathing hard, bleeding on the kitchen floor. Mara stood frozen against the counter, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Cole pulled out his phone with his free hand and called the sheriff. "Davies? It's Cole Granger. You need to get out to my ranch. Now. Jack Brennan's here. Violated his restraining order. Assaulted Mara." A pause. "Yeah, he's still here. I'm making sure he stays put." 10 minutes that felt like hours. Cole stood over Jack, not moving, not speaking. Mara sank into a chair, hugging herself. Her wrist throbbed where Jack had grabbed it. Her face stung where he'd slapped her. But she'd fought back. She'd actually fought back. When Sheriff Davies finally arrived with a deputy, he took in the scene with weary resignation. "All right, Jack, up you go." "He attacked me," Jack spat, struggling to his feet. "Granger assaulted me. After you broke into his home and put your hands on Mrs. Brennan," Davies said. "I got the restraining order notice right here. Says you're to stay at least 500 feet away from her at all times." He pulled out handcuffs. "You're under arrest for violation of a protective order and assault." "This is bullshit. She's my wife. She's a woman with a legal order of protection, and you violated it." Davies cuffed him, not gently. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." They led Jack out. He fought the whole way, yelling threats and obscenities that echoed across the yard. The deputy's car disappeared down the drive, and finally, it was quiet. Cole locked the door, came to where Mara sat. "You hurt?" "My wrist, my face." She looked up at him, at his split lip and the bruise already forming on his jaw. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine." He grabbed a dish towel, ran it under cold water, pressed it gently to her cheek. "That was stupid. I should have stayed close, should have known he might try something." "You couldn't have known." She took the towel from him, held it herself. "I hit him with the rolling pin. I actually hit him." "Good. He deserved worse." Cole sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "He's going to jail, Mara. At least for tonight, probably longer depending on what the judge decides. Robert will make sure the assault charge sticks. He'll just get angrier. Let him be angry in a cell." Cole's eyes were hard. "He crossed a line today. Put his hands on you on my property, violated a court order. That's not something he can talk his way out of." Mara wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that Jack would face consequences, that the law would actually protect her. But she'd spent too long learning that men like Jack didn't face consequences, that women like her just had to endure. What if the judge lets him out? What if he comes back? Then we deal with it. But Mara, you fought back today. You didn't freeze, didn't just take it, you defended yourself. He smiled slightly despite his split lip. "You're stronger than you think, maybe." Or maybe she'd just gotten lucky. But as the adrenaline faded and left her exhausted and shaking, she realized something important. She'd survived. Again. And each time she survived, she got a little bit harder to break. The court date for the restraining order violation came 3 days later. Jack pled no contest and got 30 days in county jail, plus an extension of the protection order. Robert called with the news, his voice pleased. "This is good for this divorce case. Shows a pattern of violence and disregard for the law. Judge won't look kindly on that." "When's the divorce hearing?" Mara asked. 6 weeks. April 15th. Jack's lawyer is pushing for alimony and property division, claiming you abandoned the marriage and caused him financial hardship. "That's ridiculous." "It's desperate, which means they know they're losing." Robert's voice was confident. "Just keep doing what you're doing, stay safe, don't engage with him, and we'll let the law handle the rest." 6 more weeks. 42 more days of waiting, of looking over her shoulder, of living in this strange limbo between married and free. It felt like forever. But spring was coming. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that would green up soon. The cattle calved, filling the pastures with awkward-legged babies. The days got longer, and Mara found herself settling into a rhythm that felt almost like a life. She cooked, she cleaned. She saved her $60 a week in a coffee can under her bed, watching the stack of bills grow into something that felt like possibility. She started helping Danny with the garden behind the main house, turning over soil that hadn't been touched since Elizabeth died. She learned the names of all the ranch hands, learned their preferences for coffee, and their stories about where they came from. And she spent evenings with Cole, usually in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about Elizabeth, about the plans they'd had before cancer stole them. She told him about her grandmother, about the woman she'd been before Jack convinced her she was worthless. They didn't talk about what would happen after the divorce, didn't talk about the gossip or the way people stared when they came to town together, just existed in the present day by day. On a Tuesday in late March, Cole came into the kitchen while she was making bread. "I need to show you something." He led her outside across the yard to the barn, but instead of going to her room above it, he took her around back to a small building she'd barely noticed before. It had been a storage shed, she thought, full of junk and forgotten equipment. It wasn't anymore. The interior had been cleaned out, the walls painted a soft cream. There was a bed, a small stove, a table and chairs, a window with real curtains, a bookshelf, a rug on the floor. "What is this?" she asked. "Your room, if you want it." Cole stayed in the doorway. "The one above the barn was always temporary. I thought you might want something more permanent, private, yours." She walked through the space, touching the furniture, the curtains. Everything was simple but solid. Well made. Chosen with care. "When did you do this?" "Been working on it for a few weeks. Danny helped." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. "I know it's not much, but it's got a lock on the door and heat and space for your things. Figured you deserve something better than plywood windows and shared walls with livestock." Mara's throat closed. She turned to face him. "Why are you doing this? All of it. The lawyer, the protection, now this." "Because you deserve it. Because everyone deserves a space that's theirs." He met her eyes. "And because I want you to know you're not temporary here. You have a place on this ranch for as long as you want it. People will talk even more. Let them." His voice was firm. "I'm done caring what people think. I care about doing what's right. And giving you a safe place to live is right." She wanted to argue, wanted to say it was too much, that she couldn't accept it. But standing in this space he'd built for her, she realized she didn't want to argue. She wanted to say yes, wanted to claim this corner of the world as her own. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate. "Thank you for seeing me, for not looking away. Thank you for being brave enough to leave, for fighting for yourself." He smiled. "You made it easy to do the right thing." That night, she moved her belongings from the room above the barn to her new space. It didn't take long, she didn't own much. But when she closed the door and locked it from the inside, when she lay down in the bed and looked around at walls that were hers, she felt something shift. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't borrowed. This was a foundation she could build on. The divorce hearing finally arrived on a cold, wet April morning. Mara dressed carefully in the gray dress she'd worn to the town meeting, her grandmother's locket around her neck. Robert met them at the courthouse, his arms full of files and documents. "Jack's here with his lawyer," Robert said quietly. "Thomas is with him. They're claiming you abandoned the marriage without cause and are seeking alimony to compensate for lost wages and damaged reputation." "Can they win that?" Cole asked. "Not with the evidence we have, but they can make it ugly." Robert looked at Mara. "You ready for this?" No, she wasn't ready to see Jack again. Wasn't ready to sit in a room with him and talk about their marriage like it was a business transaction. But ready or not, it was time. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, wood-paneled and formal. Judge Sarah Morrison presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. Jack sat at one table with his lawyer, a nervous-looking young man named Phillips. Mara sat at the other with Robert, Cole beside her in the gallery. Judge Morrison called the court to order. "This is a divorce hearing for Brennan versus Brennan. Mr. Phillips, your client is contesting the divorce?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Brennan believes the marriage can be reconciled and that Mrs. Brennan's departure was precipitous and influenced by outside parties." "Mrs. Brennan left because she was being abused," Robert said calmly. "We have medical documentation and testimony to that effect." "So noted. Mrs. Brennan, please take the stand." Mara's legs shook as she walked to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, sat down. The judge looked at her with what might have been sympathy. Mrs. Brennan, tell me in your own words why you're seeking this divorce. And so she did. She talked about the first time Jack hit her, 6 months into their marriage, over dinner, he said was too salty. About the escalating violence, the control, the isolation. About the night he cracked her ribs and she finally left. Her voice shook but held. She didn't look at Jack, just focused on the judge and told the truth. When she finished, Philip stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Brennan, isn't it true that you're currently living on the property of Cole Granger, a single man? I work for Mr. Granger as his cook. I have my own private residence on the ranch. And isn't it true that Mr. Granger is paying for your legal representation in this matter? He offered to help, yes. Offered? Philip's smile was thin. Or perhaps insisted in exchange for certain favors. Objection? Robert was on his feet. Counsel is implying facts not in evidence. Sustained. Mr. Phillips, stick to relevant questions. Phillips tried a few more angles, but Robert had prepared her well. She didn't rise to the bait, didn't let him rattle her. When she finally stepped down, she felt wrung out but intact. Jack took the stand next. He painted a picture of a troubled marriage, yes, but one caused by Mara's inadequacies. She was a poor housekeeper, he claimed, lazy, prone to exaggeration. He admitted to maybe raising his voice a few times, but denied ever hitting her. Those medical records, he said, his voice wounded. She probably got those injuries falling down. She was always clumsy. Robert stood for cross-examination, and his expression was pleasant. Mr. Brennan, you say your wife was clumsy, yet in 3 years of marriage, she never sought medical treatment until the night she left you. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe she finally hurt herself bad enough. Or maybe she was finally safe enough to seek help. Robert pulled out photographs, the ones from the town meeting and more that Dr. Chen had provided. Can you explain how someone falls down and receives bruising in the exact shape of fingerprints? Or how they split their own lip in a way consistent with being struck? Jack's face reddened. I don't have to explain anything. She's lying. Are you aware that you're currently serving jail time for violating a restraining order by assaulting Mrs. Brennan? That was Granger's fault. You were found in Mr. Granger's home, holding your wife against her will, with your hand on her throat. The sheriff documented everything. Robert's voice was sharp now. You've established a clear pattern of violence and control. Why should this court believe anything you say? Because she's mine, Jack exploded out of his chair. She's my wife, and she doesn't get to just leave because she found someone richer. Mr. Brennan, sit down. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. One more outburst and you'll be in contempt. Jack sat, breathing hard. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Robert returned to his seat, satisfied. The judge called for closing arguments. Phillips made a weak case about the sanctity of marriage and second chances. Robert methodically laid out the evidence of abuse, the pattern of escalation, the danger Mara faced if forced to remain married to a violent man. Then Judge Morrison called a recess to review the evidence. Mara sat in the hallway with Cole and Robert, unable to eat the sandwich Cole had brought, unable to think about anything except the woman in that black robe who held her future in her hands. An hour later, they were called back in. Judge Morrison looked at both parties, her expression grave. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. The medical records, the photographs, the testimony from both parties, and from Dr. Chen. She paused. Mr. Brennan, I'm appalled by what I've seen. The evidence of abuse is overwhelming and disturbing. No woman should have to endure what Mrs. Brennan endured. Jack's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent. Therefore, I'm granting the divorce. The marriage between Mara Brennan and Jackson Brennan is hereby dissolved. The gavel came down. Furthermore, I'm denying Mr. Brennan's petition for alimony. Mrs. Brennan owes you nothing. Not money, not time, not explanations. You're fortunate you're not facing additional criminal charges. Mara couldn't breathe. Couldn't process the words. Dissolved. Granted. Free. Additionally, I'm extending the restraining order indefinitely. Mr. Brennan, you are to have no contact with Mrs. Brennan, direct or indirect. If you violate this order again, you will face serious consequences. Do you understand? Yes. Jack's voice was strangled. Then we're done here. Mrs. Brennan, you're free to go. Free. The word echoed in Mara's head as she stood on shaking legs. Robert was smiling, shaking her hand. Cole's hand was on her back, steady and warm. Jack was being ushered out by his lawyer, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been grief. She walked out of this courthouse into gray drizzle that felt like baptism. The air smelled like rain and earth and possibility. Cole held an umbrella over her head, and Robert was already planning next steps, changing her name back if she wanted, filing for a new social security card, all the bureaucratic pieces of building a new life. But all Mara could think was, I'm free. I'm actually free. That night, back in the ranch, Cole built a fire in her small stove and brought over a bottle of whiskey. They sat at her table, the one he'd built, in the room he'd made for her, and drank to freedom. How does it feel? He asked. Terrifying, amazing, like I might float away if I'm not careful. She looked at her hands, at the ring finger that was bare now. She'd taken off her wedding ring weeks ago, but the pale line was still there, a ghost of what had been. I don't know who I am without being his wife. Then you get to figure it out. No rules, no expectations, just you deciding who you want to be. What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll learn, same as everyone else. He refilled her glass. You've already done the hard part, Mara. You left. You fought. You won. Everything after this is just living. Just living. It sounded so simple. But after years of merely surviving, living felt like a radical act. Thank you, she said, for everything. I wouldn't have made it without you. Yes, you would have. Maybe not the same way, but you would have found a path. His eyes were warm. You're stronger than you know. She wanted to believe him, and maybe in time she would. For now, it was enough to sit in her own space, in her own life, with the weight of marriage finally lifted from her shoulders. She was Mara Brennan. No, just Mara now. Her grandmother's last name had been Cooper. Maybe she'd take that back. Mara Cooper. It sounded like a person who could make her own choices, live her own life, build something new from the ashes of what had been. Outside, the rain fell steady and soft. Inside, the fire crackled. And for the first time in years, Mara felt something that might have been peace. The peace didn't last. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Mara woke to find her small house had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted words across the side facing the barn, ugly words she refused to repeat even to Cole. The windows were intact, but they'd dumped trash across her small porch and slashed the tires on the old bicycle Danny had given her. She stood looking at the damage in the early morning light, coffee growing cold in her hands, and felt something harden in her chest. Not fear this time, just exhaustion. She was so tired of being punished for choosing herself. Cole found her there 20 minutes later. He took one look at the paint and his face went dark. I'll call the sheriff. Don't bother, he won't do anything. Mara sipped her cold coffee. It was probably one of Jack's friends, or someone from town who thinks I deserve it. You don't deserve this. I know that, but knowing it doesn't stop it from happening. She turned to face him. How long are we supposed to keep fighting, Cole? When does it end? When they realize you're not leaving, when they get bored and move on to the next scandal. His hand hovered near her shoulder, not quite touching. Or when you decide it's not worth it anymore. Was it worth it? Standing here looking at hateful words painted on her home, knowing half the town thought she was a whore and the other half just wished she'd disappear? Was freedom worth this constant battle? Yes. The answer came swift and certain. Yes, it was worth it. Because the alternative was going back to being invisible, being silent, being small. And she'd rather be hated for who she was than loved for who she pretended to be. I'm not leaving, she said. Cole smiled, tired but genuine. Good. Now let's get this cleaned up. They spent the morning scrubbing paint and hauling trash. Danny and a few other ranch hands helped without being asked, their silent support meaning more than words. By noon, the worst of it was gone, though faint letters still ghosted the wood where the paint had soaked in. I'll repaint it this weekend, Cole said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Make it look new. Don't. Mara studied the faded words. Leave it. Let people see what they did. Let them be ashamed of it. She didn't know if they would be ashamed. Probably not. But she was done hiding evidence of cruelty to make other people comfortable. That afternoon, she went into town alone for the first time since the divorce. She needed supplies, flour, sugar, the basics she couldn't get from the ranch stores. Cole had offered to go with her, but she'd declined. She couldn't live her life afraid to walk into a store by herself. The general store went quiet when she entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Henderson was at the counter, and her expression cycled through surprise, discomfort, and something that might have been guilt before settling on forced pleasantness. "Mara? Hello, dear?" "Mrs. Henderson." Mara grabbed a basket and started shopping. Her hands didn't shake. She kept her head up. She was loading flour into her basket when she heard the whisper behind her. Two women she didn't know, voices low, but not low enough. "That's her. The one who left her husband for the Granger man. I heard he set her up in her own house on his property, paying her quite well, if you know what I mean. Shameful, and her parading around town like she's done nothing wrong." Mara turned to face them. Both women went silent, eyes wide. "I left my husband because he beat me. Mr. Granger gave me a job and a safe place to live. If that's shameful to you, then I don't know what to tell you, except that you should hope you never need the same help and find the whole town too busy judging to offer it." She turned back to her shopping, heart pounding but satisfied. Let them talk. She told the truth. At the checkout, Mrs. Henderson rang up her purchases with trembling hands. "Mara, I want you to know what happened to your house. The vandalism. That wasn't right. Some of us in the church committee, we talked about it. We're planning to say something at the next service about kindness and judgment." "That's nice, Mrs. Henderson, but it won't undo what's already been done." Mara paid for her groceries. "And it won't change the fact that half of you watched me get hurt for years and said nothing until it became too public to ignore." "We didn't know." "You knew. You all knew. You just didn't want to get involved." Mara picked up her bags. "The difference between you and Cole Granger is that he decided one person's safety mattered more than staying comfortable. Maybe think about that at your next committee meeting." She walked out with her head high. Even though her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the bags getting them into Cole's truck. She sat in the driver's seat. She'd been practicing, getting her confidence back behind the wheel, and let herself have one moment of trembling before she started the engine and drove home. Home. The ranch had become that without her quite noticing. Not the house Cole lived in, or even her small cottage, but the whole place. The land, the rhythm of the seasons, the people who worked there. It was the first place that felt like hers in ways that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with choice. Spring turned to summer. The garden she and Danny had planted exploded with growth, tomatoes and beans and squash that she harvested and preserved, filling mason jars with the colors of the season. The ranch hands praised her cooking, and she started experimenting, trying recipes her grandmother had taught her that she'd been too afraid to make for Jack because he only liked simple food, bland food that didn't challenge or surprise. Cole started joining her for breakfast in addition to dinner. They'd sit at her small table, coffee steaming between them, and talk about the day ahead or the past or nothing in particular. He told her about his plans to expand the herd, and she found herself offering opinions that he actually considered. She told him about the woman from the town meeting who'd stopped by one afternoon, the one with the husband who got angry. She'd left him, was staying with her sister in the next county, wanted to thank Mara for showing her it was possible. "You're changing things," Cole said one morning, watching her over his coffee cup. "One woman at a time, maybe. But it matters. I didn't set out to change anything. I just wanted to survive. Sometimes survival is revolutionary." He set down his cup. "Especially when the world expects you to quietly disappear instead." That was the thing about Cole that still surprised her. He saw the significance in things she thought were ordinary. Her cooking wasn't just cooking, it was art. Her garden wasn't just vegetables, it was creation. Her choice to stay wasn't just stubbornness, it was courage. Being around someone who saw her that way was changing how she saw herself, but it was also complicating things. She'd catch herself watching him when he worked, admiring the economy of his movements, the way he handled the horses with firm gentleness. She'd notice how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his laugh, rare but real, changed the whole atmosphere of a room. She'd feel something warm in her chest when he showed up at her door with wildflowers he'd picked, or a book he thought she'd like, and it scared her. "I think I might have feelings for him," she told Dr. Chen one afternoon. She'd started seeing Sarah for regular checkups, and somehow those appointments had become as much about mental health as physical. Sarah was easy to talk to, non-judgmental, and had a way of asking questions that made Mara think. For Cole? Sarah didn't look up from the blood pressure cuff she was adjusting. Yes. And that scares you. Of course it does. I've been divorced for 4 months. I spent 3 years in an abusive marriage before that. I don't trust my own judgment about men. What if I'm just latching on to him because he helped me? What if it's not real? Sarah finished with the blood pressure, made a note in Mara's file. What if it is real? Then I'm an idiot for risking the one good thing in my life by making it complicated. Or you're human. Sarah sat down on her rolling stool. Mara, you've spent years having your feelings controlled, dismissed, and punished. It's going to take time to trust them again. But feelings aren't the problem. What you do with them is what matters. So, what do I do? What do you want to do? Mara thought about it. I want to keep things as they are. I like having breakfast with him. I like talking to him. I like knowing he's there. I don't want to ruin it by wanting more. Have you considered that he might want more too? That's worse, because then I'd have to figure out if I'm ready for more, and I don't think I am. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to let someone that close again. Sarah's expression was kind. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just be honest with yourself about what you're feeling. The rest will work itself out. But the rest wasn't working itself out. It was getting more complicated. In late July, Cole asked her to come with him to a cattle auction in Cheyenne. I could use a second set of eyes, he said. And you've been working hard. A day away might be good. She should have said no, should have recognized it for what it was. Not quite a date, but not quite not a date either. But she said yes because she wanted to spend the day with him, wanted to see him in his element, wanted the easy conversation and comfortable silences they'd built. The auction was overwhelming. Hundreds of cattle, dozens of ranchers, the sound of bidding, and the smell of livestock thick in the air. Cole navigated it with confidence, pointing out good stock and explaining bloodlines and traits Mara was learning to recognize. She found herself enjoying it, enjoying his expertise, enjoying being included in this part of his world. On the drive home with the sun setting orange and gold over the mountains, Cole glanced at her. Thanks for coming. It's nice having company. Thanks for asking. They drove in silence for a while. Then Cole said, Can I ask you something? Her stomach tightened. Sure. Are you happy? Here, on the ranch. Yes. Happier than I've been in a long time. Good. He paused. Because I'd like you to stay. Long term. Not just as the cook. I'd like you to be part of the ranch, a partner in running it. Mara's breath caught. Cole, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I know it's complicated. I know you need time. His hands were tight on the steering wheel. But I also know that you're good at this. You understand the work, you're good with the hands, you've got ideas that could really help the place grow. And I trust you. That's not something I say lightly. I don't know anything about running a ranch. You know more than you think, and you can learn the rest. He risked a quick look at her. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. Just think about it. She thought about it for the next 3 weeks. Lay awake at night weighing possibilities and complications. A partnership would mean commitment, stability, a real future. It would also mean tangling her life even more completely with Cole's, and she wasn't sure she could separate business from the feelings that kept growing despite her best efforts to contain them. Finally, on a hot August afternoon, while they were both weeding the garden, she brought it up. I've been thinking about your offer, the partnership. Cole's hand stilled in the dirt. And? I want to say yes, but I need you to understand something first. She sat back on her heels, met his eyes. I have feelings for you, real feelings. And I don't know if that's because you saved me or because you're genuinely who I'd choose if I was thinking clearly. I don't trust my own judgment yet. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have feelings for you too. Have for a while now. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. Cole, but I'm not going to act on them. Not until you're ready. Not until you're sure. He pulled off his work gloves. The partnership offer stands regardless. Business is business. Whatever else happens or doesn't happen between us, that's separate. Is it? Can it be separate? It has to be. Because you need to know you have a place here that's not dependent on my feelings or yours. You need security that's not tied to whether we work out as anything other than business partners. His voice was firm. I won't make the same mistake Jack did, tying your survival to a relationship. You get to choose what you want, and you get to keep your job and your home either way. The relief that flooded through her was profound. Thank you for understanding. I'm trying to. He smiled slightly. I won't pretend it's easy, but you're worth the patience. She took the partnership. They drew up papers with Robert Chen, legal documents that gave her a percentage of the ranch's profits and a say in major decisions. It was terrifying and exhilarating and felt like planting roots for the first time in her life. The town slowly, grudgingly, began to accept her presence. Not everyone. There were still people who crossed the street to avoid her, who muttered when she passed, but others started nodding hello. The woman from the meeting, whose name was Laura, started stopping by the ranch sometimes to talk. She'd left her husband and was rebuilding her life too. They swapped stories and strategies, and something like friendship grew. Dr. Chen invited Mara to join a women's group that met monthly. Nothing formal, just conversation and support. Mara went reluctantly, but found herself looking forward to it. These were women of all ages, all situations, many of whom had their own stories of leaving, surviving, rebuilding. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone, even when it felt like it. Fall arrived with golden aspens and the hard work of preparing for winter. Mara and Cole worked side by side, their partnership settling into something comfortable and productive. She learned the business side of ranching, the budgets and markets and seasonal rhythms. He learned to value her input, to see her not as someone to protect, but as someone capable of standing beside him. And slowly, carefully, the feelings between them evolved into something neither of them named, but both acknowledged. A hand on the small of her back when she was tired. His jacket draped over her shoulders when evenings got cold, her fingers brushing his when passing the coffee pot. Small gestures that said what words couldn't yet. In October, a year after she'd left Jack, Mara stood in her cottage and realized she'd gone a whole day without thinking about him, without checking over her shoulder, without waiting for the other shoe to drop. She'd just lived her life, and he hadn't been part of it. That's when she knew she was really free. She found Cole in the barn, checking on a mare who was close to foaling. Can we talk? He looked up, instantly concerned. Everything okay? Yes. Everything's good, She took a breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about having feelings for me. His expression went carefully neutral. Okay. I think I'm ready. Not for everything, not all at once, but I'm ready to try, to see what this could be if we let it. She twisted her hands together. If you still want to. Cole set down the brush he'd been holding and crossed to where she stood. I want to. Have wanted to. But Mara, I need you to be sure. I need you to know that you can change your mind at any point and nothing else changes. Your job, your home, our partnership, none of that is conditional on this working out. I know, that's why I can try, because I know I'm safe either way. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. I'm going to kiss you now, if that's all right. That's all right. The kiss was gentle, tentative, nothing like the demanding kisses Jack had forced on her. This was a question, an offering, a promise of patience. When they pulled apart, Mara was shaking, but not from fear, from possibility. How was that? Cole asked, his voice rough. Good. Scary. Good. We can go slow. I'd like that. They did go slow. Dinners became dates. Conversations deepened. Touches became more frequent, more familiar. Mara learned the difference between being wanted and being owned, between love and control. Cole learned her boundaries, her triggers, the ways trauma had rewired her responses. They stumbled sometimes, had difficult conversations, worked through misunderstandings with patience and honesty. It wasn't perfect. Mara still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, still had moments where fear swamped her, and she had to remind herself that Cole wasn't Jack, that this was different, that she was safe. Cole had his own ghosts, the guilt over Elizabeth, the fear of losing someone else, the tendency to shoulder too much responsibility alone. But they worked at it. They chose each other every day, and that choice mattered more than the difficulty. By spring, Mara had been on the ranch for 18 months. The garden exploded with life, bigger than the year before. She'd hired 2 women from town to help with the cooking during busy season, both of them escaping difficult situations, both of them needing what she'd needed, a chance. The ranch was thriving under their partnership, and her name was on the deed now. Mara Cooper, landowner, partner, survivor. One evening in May, Cole found her in the garden, hands in the dirt, face tilted toward the sun. He sat beside her, quiet for a moment. "I have something to ask you," he said. She looked at him, saw the nervous energy beneath his calm exterior. "All right. I love you, you know that." "I know, I love you too. I want to marry you. Someday. Not now, I know it's too soon. But someday when you're ready, I want you to be my wife." He held up a hand when she started to speak. "But I need you to know it's not about ownership or control. It's about partnership, equal partnership. You'd keep your name if you wanted, keep your independence. This ranch would be ours, not mine. Any children we had would be raised knowing their mother is strong and capable and equal." Tears slipped down Mara's cheeks. "You've thought about children? If you want them. If you don't, that's okay too. I just want you, however that looks." She'd never imagined she could have this. A man who asked instead of demanded, who saw strength instead of weakness, who offered partnership instead of possession, the possibility of children, not as obligations, but as choices. A future built on respect and love and hard-won trust. "Ask me again in a year," she said. "I think my answer will be yes." His smile could have lit the valley. "I can wait a year." "And Cole?" She took his hand. "Thank you. For seeing me, for not looking away, for giving me the space to become who I was supposed to be." "You did that yourself. I just didn't get in your way." Maybe that was true. Maybe she would have found her strength eventually, would have left and rebuilt and survived without him. But having someone stand beside her instead of in front of her, someone who believed she was capable of her own rescue, had made all the difference. A year later, almost to the day, they married in the garden she'd built. It was small, just the ranch hands, Dr. Chen and Robert, a handful of friends. Laura came with her new boyfriend, a gentleman who worked at the library in Laramie. No church ladies, no town council, no one who judged or condemned or tried to make her small. Mara wore a simple cream dress and her grandmother's locket. Cole wore his best suit and looked at her like she'd hung the moon. When the justice of the peace asked if she took this man, she said yes without hesitation. And when Cole slipped the ring on her finger, it felt nothing like chains. It felt like freedom. They honeymooned by staying home and working the ranch. It was perfect. 2 years later, Mara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Elizabeth Sarah, after the women who'd helped shape their lives. Ellie, for short. She had Cole's eyes and Mara's stubborn chin and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Mara held her daughter in the hospital and felt something fundamental shift. This tiny person would never know what it was like to be afraid in her own home. Would never learn to make herself small, would grow up watching her mother run a ranch, make decisions, be treated as an equal, would understand that strength came in many forms, and that asking for help wasn't weakness. "She's going to be trouble," Cole said, touching Ellie's tiny fist. "Good," Mara said. "The world needs more trouble from women who know their worth." Ellie grew up wild and loved, running through pastures with the ranch dogs, learning to ride before she could properly walk, helping Mara in the garden with dirty hands and grass-stained knees. She learned about fear. Mara was honest about her past in age-appropriate ways, but she learned more about courage, about choosing yourself, about the difference between love and control. When Ellie was 5, she asked why Grandma and Grandpa Brennan never visited. Mara had been dreading this question. "My first husband, his family, they weren't kind people," Mara said carefully. "Sometimes we have to choose who gets to be in our lives, and I chose people who treat us with respect." "Like Daddy?" "Like Daddy. And Uncle Danny and Aunt Sarah?" "Exactly like them." Ellie processed this. "Okay, can I have a cookie?" And that was that. Simple, uncomplicated acceptance of the truth. Mara's past was part of her story, but it didn't define her anymore. She was a rancher, a wife, a mother, a friend. She was someone who'd survived and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The ranch prospered. They expanded the herd, improved the land, hired more hands. Mara's cooking reputation spread, and people started driving out from town to buy her preserves and baked goods. She started a small business, employing women who needed second chances, teaching them skills that could lead to independence. It grew beyond what she'd imagined. A storefront in town, wholesale accounts, a reputation that reached beyond the valley. Cole stepped back from some of the day-to-day operations, trusting Mara to manage large portions of the business. They were true partners in every sense, their strengths complementing each other, their respect for each other deepening with every challenge they faced together. The town never fully embraced Mara. There were still people who crossed the street, who muttered about her past, who thought she'd gotten above herself. But there were also people who sent their daughters to work for her, who asked her advice, who pointed to her as proof that leaving was possible, that rebuilding was achievable, that survival could transform into something that looked like triumph. On a fall day 10 years after she'd left Jack, Mara stood on her porch and watched Ellie and her younger brother Thomas, named for Cole's father, not Jack's brother, chase chickens across the yard. Cole was repairing a fence in the distance. The mountains were bright with aspens turned gold. The air smelled like wood smoke and coming winter and home. She thought about the woman she'd been. Small, scared, convinced she was worthless. That woman felt like someone from another life. She'd been buried under Jack's abuse, under the town's judgment, under her own shame and fear. But she hadn't died. She'd just been waiting for the moment she would finally choose herself, waiting for someone to see her and refuse to look away, waiting to discover that she was stronger than every voice that had told her otherwise. The journey hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks and scars, nightmares that still came sometimes, moments when the old fear tried to reclaim her. But she'd learned that healing wasn't linear, that strength wasn't about never being afraid, and that freedom was something you chose every single day. She'd learned that love didn't have to hurt, that partnership could be equal, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that her worth wasn't determined by how small she could make herself, but by how fully she could become herself. Most importantly, she'd learned that she had never been broken. She'd been bent, battered, pushed to the very edge. But broken things don't grow back, and she had grown into someone she liked, someone she respected, someone who could stand in her own life and know she belonged there. Ellie ran up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Mama, can I help with dinner?" "Of course you can. Can I cut the carrots?" "If you're careful." "I'm always careful." She said it with such confidence, such absolute certainty of her own competence, that Mara's heart swelled. This is what she'd fought for. Not just her own freedom, but the freedom of this child to grow up believing in herself, untainted by the kind of violence that taught you to doubt your own worth. Inside, they worked together in the kitchen Mara had made her own. Ellie chattered about her day while carefully wielding the vegetable knife, and Mara listened with half her attention while the other half marveled at the ordinary miracle of this moment. Safety, peace, love that didn't demand anything except presence. When Cole came in for dinner, he kissed Mara's temple and ruffled Ellie's hair and lifted Thomas onto his hip. They sat around the table, the one Cole had built years ago, and shared the meal Mara had prepared. They talked and laughed and argued playfully about whose turn it was to do dishes. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. It was everything Mara had thought she'd never have. That night, after the children were asleep and Cole was reading in bed, Mara stood at the window looking out at the dark expanse of the ranch. Somewhere out there, Jack was living his life. She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd remarried, moved to Montana, worked construction. She hoped he'd changed, hoped his new wife was safe. But it wasn't her problem anymore. He was a chapter that was closed. "You okay?" Cole's voice came from the bed. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how far I've come. How different everything is." He set down his book. "Any regrets?" She thought about it honestly. "I regret the years I lost, the woman I could have been if I'd left sooner. But I don't regret the journey that got me here. Every hard thing taught me something I needed to know." "You're pretty wise for someone who used to insist she was just a cook." She laughed. "I'm still just a cook who also happens to run a ranch and a business and a family. So not just a cook." "No," she agreed. "Not just anything." She climbed into bed beside him, and he pulled her close. This was another thing she'd had to learn, how to accept affection without bracing for the blow that would follow, how to trust that gentle could stay gentle, how to exist in her own body without constantly monitoring for danger. "I love you," Cole said into her hair. "I love you too. Thank you for choosing me, for letting me be part of your story. Thank you for helping me write a better one." They fell asleep tangled together, and Mara's dreams were peaceful. No nightmares tonight, just the deep, restful sleep of someone who'd fought her way to safety and won. In the years that followed, Mara became known throughout the valley and beyond, not as the woman who'd left her husband or the woman who'd caused a scandal, but as the woman who'd built something from nothing, the woman who employed other women trying to escape, the woman whose ranch prospered under equal partnership, the woman whose children were kind and confident and taught by example that strength meant standing up, not tearing down. She spoke sometimes at women's shelters, telling her story to rooms full of scared, hurting women who needed to know that leaving was possible, that survival was achievable, that the person who hurt you didn't get to write the ending of your story. "I won't tell you it's easy," she'd say. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I will tell you that you're stronger than you know, that you deserve better than what you're getting, and that there are people who will help if you let them." She'd watch faces in those rooms, some skeptical, some hopeful, all of them carrying the same weight she'd once carried. And she'd remember the woman from the town meeting, the one who'd said thank you for speaking up. She'd remember Laura, who'd left because Mara showed her it was possible. She'd remember all the women who'd worked for her over the years, who'd used that job as a stepping stone to their own independence. One woman's freedom could light the path for another's. That's what she'd learned. And if her pain could serve a purpose, could help even one person find their way out, then maybe it had been worth it. But mostly, she just lived, raised her children, ran her businesses, loved her husband, tended her garden. She laughed with friends and argued with suppliers and celebrated small victories and weathered small defeats. She got older, found silver in her hair, earned the lines around her eyes from smiling. She became herself. Not the woman Jack had tried to make her, not the woman the town had expected her to be, but simply Mara. Complex, flawed, strong, scared, brave, ordinary, extraordinary Mara. And on quiet mornings when she stood on her porch, with coffee steaming in her hands, watching the sun rise over the mountains that had witnessed her transformation, she would think about the woman she'd been. The one who'd lived in fear, who'd believed she deserved the pain, who'd thought she was too weak to leave. She'd think about her with compassion now, not judgment. That woman had done the best she could with what she knew. And when she'd learned better, she'd done better. That was all anyone could ask. The truth she'd discovered, the one she wished she could go back and tell that scared woman in the kitchen making perfect eggs with shaking hands, was simple. You were never broken. You were simply waiting for the moment you would finally choose yourself. And when that moment came, when you found the courage to say enough, to walk away, to believe you deserved more, that's when your real life would begin. Not a perfect life, not an easy life, but a life that was yours. A life lived in daylight instead of shadow. A life where fear was a visitor, not a permanent resident. A life where love was gentle and partnership was real, and strength was measured not by how much you could endure, but by how fully you could become. Standing there with the morning sun on her face, and her family sleeping safely in the house behind her, and the land she'd earned stretching out before her, Mara felt something she'd once thought impossible. Contentment. Deep, abiding contentment with exactly who she was and where she was and what she'd built from the ashes of what had been. She'd survived, she'd fought, she'd won, and in the end, that was everything.